distinguished participants, we have Ms. Ama Abledu, who is a lawyer, a lecturer, and energy consultant. She's a bilingual legal practitioner and a Harvard certified negotiator holding a postgraduate degree in oil and gas law, international investment arbitration from the University of Aberdeen, Scotland. Yam is a critical thinker with high performance rate in court proceedings. In 2014, she obtained her master's degree in oil and gas with professional skills from University of Aberdeen, Scotland, where her outstanding academic performance won her the Eds and Ravenscroft's 2014 Prize for Academic Excellence. Within the same period, Yama attained certification from the Oil and Gas Academy of Scotland as an oil and gas contract negotiator. She has a lot of accolades and professional competencies that you can glean from the brochure that we sent. So on behalf of the team at ACEP and all participants, I thank you and I'm grateful for your acceptance to chair this section. So I'll leave that to you to take it from here. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you so much. Welcome, everybody. Good morning to everyone. Welcome to the second panel discussion for today. My name is Ama Abledu. As Mr. Sufa has rightly said, I'm a lawyer and a law lecturer at the University of Professional Studies, Accra. I teach energy law, and I'm an energy consultant. I hope you enjoyed the session. I believe 2020 is an important year for the international climate agenda. It marks an opportunity to assess the implementation of the Paris Agreement that was signed in 2015. However, today we are focusing on the Green Revolution agenda. We'll be discussing climate finance and the financing options for green development in Africa. We will also be discussing climate finance and why it is important. We will discuss the modalities to access the funds to do green projects. We will visit the role of development banks in supporting climate change. We will discuss the other innovative financial options we have beyond the Green Climate Fund. We would also visit climate negotiations and what African governments should look or should be thinking about in negotiating better for climate finance in COP26. For today, we've lined up three wonderful speakers to take us through this discussion. We have Mr. Mark Ofori-Kwafo, who is the Regional Coordinator, Environmental Sustainability, EcoBank Anglophone, West Africa. And we have Dr. Olumfosho Somorin, who is the Regional Principal Officer, African Development Bank. And our third speaker is Mr. Vernon Sondo, who is a Managing Director and Co-Founder of Chance Afri Ghana Limited. He's into sustainability for businesses. So I'd like to go straight into the discussion and call Mr. Mark Kwafo from EcoBank to do a presentation on how the GCF operates. He will tell us about who can access the funds, the challenges, and the practical solutions to improving access to the fund. Thank you. Mr. Kwaf.
Sorry. Hello. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this session as well. Thank you very much for the opportunity to make this presentation on. I particularly need to answer how the GCF operates, who can access the fund, the challenges and practical solutions to improving access to the fund, etc. So I will do that quickly. I'm told I have 10 minutes, and let me see what I can do in 10 minutes. I sent the presentation. I don't know whether it can be beamed, but I'll present what I have here. So, as defined, the GCF is a multilateral fund created as an operating entity of the financial mechanism of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change to make significant and ambitious contribution to combat climate change. So basically, the GCF is set up, of course, to see as ambitious and require a paradigm shift in making a change to combat climate change. Now, the targets, among others, includes agriculture, water, energy, transportation, building and real estate, and then industry and SMEs. The GCF worked through a select number of financial intermediaries that meet the fiduciary standards. Yes, the GCF has a fiduciary standards called basic fiduciary standard, specialized fiduciary standards. The basic fiduciary standards require a certain level of accountability and transparency. And then the specialized fiduciary have fiduciary standards for project management, for on-lending and blending, and then for grant award mechanism. And all of it has its own standards referred to as the fiduciary standards. And for an entity to be accredited, the entity needs to be able to meet these standards. Next. Great. So it has a clear objective. The objective of the Green Climate Fund is to contribute to the achievement of the ultimate objective of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, UNFCCC. In the context of sustainable development, the GCF will promote the paradigm shift towards the low emission and climate resilient development pathways by providing support to developing countries to limit or reduce their greenhouse gas emissions and to adapt to the impacts of climate change, taking into account the needs of those developing countries, particularly those vulnerable to the adverse effect of climate change. So, as usual, there are a lot of terminology there. Low emission is like reducing carbon emission, of course, the major component being reduction in the use of fossil fuels. Of course, paradigm shift requires that things are done differently from the business as usual situation. Now, the business as usual situation shift, where maybe there comes different ways of doing things, where accountability and transparency is taken up to a certain level. There was a question as to whether how will EcoBank manage it so that the thing, how does EcoBank intend to improve African countries' access to the GCF, other things, and then maybe improving access to the funds, and then whether the EcoBank will manage to the benefit of all, probably just to their benefit. And at this point, maybe I have to make it clear that if you are managing or maybe using GCF funds for a project, the specific last PESWA agreement on how the last PESWA is to be used is arranged between the accredited entity and the GCF. And there's no room for, so everything that you need, thing that you need to be able to execute the project, you have negotiated with the GCF. And by the time the project rolls out, there is nothing like any additional thing coming to you apart from what has been agreed. Of course, fees and other things are given to cater for the things that you do. And then the next stage is asking questions about the, that is the objective of the GCF. And then we look at EcoBank's role in it. And then EcoBank, asking whether EcoBank is indeed that ready to do the partner with the GCF and then for the benefit of Africa. But then to answer that, I'll just use our vision and our mission. You know, EcoBank's vision is to build a world-class Pan-African bank and contribute to the economic development and financial integration of Africa. So now, if development is going towards the points of renewables and climate change, then of course it is a part of our duty to ensure that, yes, we provide a financial platform in line with our vision to ensure that Africa, the Pan-African vision, is achieved. And of course, our mission is to provide all our customers with convenient and reliable financial products and services, so that, of course, in achieving this vision, clients who are involved are given good terms and conditions to be able to be part of this, looking for this solution. Can we go on?
Yes, please.
Good. So we can move on. Those are the sections and which EcoBank does its business, but I think we can proceed from here. And then, well, EcoBank, yes, EcoBank Ghana has met the fiduciary principles. So what it means is that we've met the principles of transparency and accountability, of environmental and social safeguards, as well as the gender policy. And of course, in line with the operational policies and guidelines of the GCF board for assessing resources from the fund. So that is what accreditation means. You should be able to meet those fiduciary standards. And I must say that, well, it doesn't come in that easy. There are things that you have to do because you know, the idea is talk about paradigm shift. And one of the major shifts I can cite here, for instance, is that if now any entity wants to maybe execute a climate resilient project using GCF funds, you cannot develop that project in isolation. You have to put EcoBank and stakeholders who will be affected by the project are also supposed to be involved, and the stakeholder engagement is supposed to be proof of the part of the development of this project. And this project is supposed to be presented, of course, by the accredited entity. So traditionally, a commercial bank, you take your business plan to the bank will assess and probably approve your project. But if you are doing a GCF project, GCF funded project, then you have to do all this development of the project with the accredited guidelines of the bank, which are duties that bank traditionally did not do. So this is part of the paradigm shift approach to resolving climate change problems. And then we have a financial capacity which is accredited at medium, which means that EcoBank can handle single project sizes of up to the value of $250 million. And then our environmental safeguard level is medium. That's accreditation level that EcoBank has for now, and they operate within that. And then we also do on lending and blending as a case. Sorry. Okay. So we we take the full response. Know that the role of commercial banks in facilitating these things is to we appreciate is to demand for financing with supply of financing at lowest possible transaction cost, of course. And then EcoBank offers expertise and support tailored to the needs of actors within all sectors, including climate finance. Individuals and businesses can take advantage of even our already existing flexible product range. Sorry, that can be tailored to meet your needs. So we appreciate our role. To an extent, we have things that we're doing already. But I know a lot of discussion has gone on renewable energy. And because of time, I do not really intend to discuss all of this, but I just give an idea that it's easy to say you are assessing facility for various projects. But in doing so, we need to also consider some risk factors. And for the sake of time, I just mentioned the market risk, regulatory and policy risk, legal risk, currency risk, and of course, we can go on to the next sheet because of time. I may not have the time to explain all this, but if there is any of it for which we need to give specific information, we'll do that. Of course, inflation. And then our commitment is also shown here that EcoBank, we have a dedication in supporting utilization of resources from multilateral organizations. I will continue to provide a platform in support of initiatives by individuals, businesses, and governments. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Just joined us. This is the second session for today. And in this session, we'll be discussing how to finance climate change action. I've already gone ahead and discussed what we'll be discussing throughout the session. And then I've introduced our three speakers that we've lined up. But before that, I'd like to acknowledge our partners and our sponsors, Nochua International and Kenya Advisory Limited. I also like to acknowledge our sponsors, Oxfam and then Ford Foundation. Thank you. Those who just joined, the person, Mr. Kwafo from EcoBank just gave a presentation on the GCF fund, and then he gave us some insights into what's the fund, the challenges of the fund, and then some practical solutions to improving access to the fund. Mr. Mark Ofori-Kwafo is the regional coordinator of EcoBank Anglophone West Africa. He has held several positions as EcoBank Ghana Limited, including head of procurement and project management. Prior to his engagement with the EcoBank, he worked with the Electricity Company of Ghana and the Tema Municipal Assembly. Mr. Kwafo is an alumnus of Cambridge Institute of Sustainable Leadership. He has also participated in the Climate and Sustainability Finance Summer Academy in Frankfurt, Germany. Thank you. So I'd like to move on to our second speaker, Dr. Olufosho Somorin, and I'll do a little introduction of Dr. Olufosho. Dr. Olufosho is the Regional Principal Officer at the Africa Development Bank. He's done climate change for 15 years. So Dr. Olufosho leads the bank's work on climate change and green growth in the 13 countries, which consists of the Eastern Africa region. In addition, he leads policy dialogues with national, regional governments on developing policy frameworks for managing local and regional economic and social issues, resilience, state building goals, regional integration, food security, climate change, and inclusive growth. Prior to joining the bank in 2012, Dr. Olufosho was an associate professional officer with the Center for International Forestry Research based in Cameroon. He led a number of policy-relevant research analysis on mainstreaming climate change adaptation and mitigation into national development policy of Central African countries. Dr. Somorin holds a PhD in International Environment Policy from the Wageningen University in Netherlands. Dr. Olufosho, please, your turn.
Thank you.
After the
all right.
I could
all right. Thank you very much.
Yeah, you're welcome.
All right. Thank you, Yom. Good afternoon, everyone. So greetings from Nairobi, Kenya. We are 3 hours ahead of you guys in Ghana. And thanks to everyone who's joined, and thanks to the organizers as well for extending an invitation to us at the African Development Bank. Again, I actually want to say that, you know, I joined from the first speakers, the previous session before this, and I've really much enjoyed the quality of the conversation so far. And I think it's quite interesting again to see that we're having a conversation around financing green development. I'm mindful of time, but I want to put a few things, 3 points out there. First, thank you to my colleague from EcoBank. Thank you for setting a very good scene on what the finance market looks like and using a particular case study of the Green Climate Fund. I don't want to assume everybody here, everyone listening to me, we are all on the same page when it comes to our common understanding of what climate finance and the whole finance architecture, what's it about. So I won't want to go into definition of what climate finance is or what it is not, but it's very important to emphasize that any source of finance, you know, public or private, that is used to implement activities, to finance activities that are consistent with either adaptation or mitigation, it's finance, it's climate finance. And that's a broad understanding of what climate finance is. And this broad understanding also means that even if a community, a group of people come together to do agriculture, for instance, differently in a conservation way, that is the climate finance. We may not capture it in the national budget, we may not capture it at global level, but it is climate finance in a way. And so the world of climate finance is very broad. And that's the first point. The second point is we should not limit it to the ability to only access the external funds. So there are a number of climate funds out there. So please understand it. There's climate finance, there's climate fund. There are climate funds. Climate finance is the use of the money to finance activities that help you in the resilience, or adaptation, or mitigation. The funds are like, you know, set up institutional or aggregate of collections and donations from different bodies into a very structured fund. And one of them is the Green Climate Fund. But there are other climate funds out there as well. There's a Global Environment Facility, GEF. There's a Climate Investment Funds, and all of these funds, the lot of them. So some are global in nature, like the Green Climate Fund that you heard about. Some are very bilateral. So you can have a fund that is provided by the UK, available for a particular country in Africa, for instance, say Ghana. You can have some that are quite regional. You have the African Climate Change Fund, hosted by the African Development Bank. So there are multiple funds out there, and it's very important to understand that we're not limited to one fund. You have multiple funds, and each fund has its own eligibility criteria. So that's the second point. It's very important to understand that. But the biggest of them all, and probably the one that has made the biggest news, is the Green Climate Fund, which you've heard about. And I think it's very important to know that the fund is quite huge, and it has the ability to, do a number of, to finance a number of projects across multiple sectors. And my colleague had really done a good job in listing all of that. Let me tell you where the bank comes in. So number one, when it comes to this narrative around assessing funds, green investment, it's very important to understand that what you call money or finance in any form, money, and I have a personal philosophical statement about this, and it's very much like condensing the work that I've been doing over multiple years into these statements. Money moves in three directions. So whether it's you choose to call it finance moves in three directions. So I call it finance movement. The first one is it moves in the direction of a solvable problem. Is there a problem to be solved? And I think when you bring that to the context of Africa, we've got enormous opportunity to have problems solved. So think about it. In the energy space alone, and you're going to keep hearing a lot about clean energy. In the renewable energy space alone, so first and foremost, what is the problem? We've got 640 million Africans right now who do not have access to electricity. 640 million people do not have access. That is almost 40% of our population, and that represents the lowest access globally. So Africa has the lowest access globally. Let me give you some other numbers. The per unit consumption, in Africa, it's 180 kilowatts per hour per person. If you remove South Africa, in sub-Saharan Africa, this is sub-Saharan Africa. When you compare that to someone in America, it's 180 in sub-Saharan Africa, excluding South Africa. In America, we're talking about 13,000 kilowatts per hour per person. In Europe, we're talking about 6,500. Look at the gap between America and to Africa. As that problem alone, which is solvable, it's an opportunity to generate finance. And I think it's very, very important to understand that money moves in the direction of solvable problems. The second thing about money movement is money moves in the direction of capacity. It's not enough to say I need money. It's not enough to say I have a problem that is solvable, that I need money for. It's also important that you have, at least at the very minimum, a basic level of capacity to be able to use the money. So what are those capacity? We're talking about capacity to develop bankable projects. I'll give you one experience that I've come across over the last few years. It's funny that those who have money in this world of ours, they say we can't find projects to invest in. And when you go to people who have projects, they say we cannot find money. Two groups of people in the same space, in the same ecosystem, on the same continent, and perhaps in the same country. One is saying, I can't find projects to invest in, and the other one is saying, I have projects, but I can't find money. And the disconnect between this, and it's actually a paradox if you think about it. The disconnect is largely due to the fact that we don't have what we call bankable projects. And please, you may call it investable projects, you may call it, fundable projects, but you must understand what it means to call something bankable. Because what you have, if you are the project proponent, if you're the project developer, What you call bankable may not be the same as what the person who is ready to give you money is called bankable. So we need capacity to develop bankable projects. We also need institutional capacity, policy capacity. Do we have incentives in place, policy incentives for us to go green? Those are some of the conversations. And I'm saying this because I also want you to know the work that the bank does. In the interest of time, the third movement of money, its money moves in the direction of relationships, particularly relationships built on trust. And I think it's very important that we must consider, and this is part of this conversation we're having, on the one hand, it's a knowledge sharing platform, and it's about exchanging ideas, but on the other hand as well, we're also trying to see what kind of relationship do we need to build in order to be able to assess the scale of finance that we need. And I think it's very important to understand what those three money movements. So what we've done at the African Development Bank over the years is to identify what are the bottlenecks to African assessing the scale of capital that we need to be able to do some of these bankable projects that we're talking about. And so it starts with, first, we're able to engage policy at the national level. We're able to engage government to say, listen, it starts with you. You can't expect a private sector investment in a country that does not have an enabling environment that provides security for private capital flow. So you have to have a policy, you have to have a regulatory system that is consistent with what private capital investors are looking out for. And so these are part of the work that we do at the African Development Bank. The second point is also to say, listen, at the government level as well, you need to develop a bunch of managerial and technical capacity that puts you at a position where you understand the heart of the matter. And it's very important that you exhibit that high level knowledgeability and the possibility of implementability in your country when it comes to that project. And that capacity is important, it's available, and you can get into it. In some other cases at the bank, we provide technical assistance to these countries to say, listen, if you need to put certain things in place, and it's going to cost you some money, we're able to help you through it. But we don't stop at the level of government as well. We also go to some of, I've been doing some work in the region where we're trying to Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Kindly go on.
Okay, good. So, okay, good. So it's very important to understand the whole system around finance. So please, let's not make the mistake to think finance is all about going to an ATM machine, you press a 4-digit code and you get the money. No, there's a whole structure around it. And it's important that we build that structure in order to have the scale of money that we need, because it's a lot of money, but we also, it's not just the scale. We want the money to be sustainable over a long period of time. So I'm going to keep it here, but I'm looking forward to, conversation along in the course of this panel discussion. Thank you very much. Over to you, Jan.
Thank you very much, Dr. Olufosho, for that very insightful conversation. You said that the money must be sustainable, and that brings us to the third speaker, Mr. Vernon Sando. I'd like to introduce Mr. Vernon Sando. Mr. Vernon Sando is the Managing Director and Co-founder of Chant Africa Ghana Limited. Mr. Sando is a sustainable business and management professional with over 16 years of experience in sustainable business and climate consulting, especially with integrating ESG in traditional business environments. He is the co-founder of Chant Africa Limited, a change, innovation, and transformation hub that focuses on helping households, organizations, and communities realize value through the eco-efficiency and eco-innovation lens. Mr. Sando, you are on, please.
Okay, thank you very much for the warm introduction. I have a couple of slides which I will share if that's okay. I think much has been said already. It's always good to kind of be coming after two brilliant panelists who've already said it all. I'll probably just not say much, but then focus on what we know about sustainable finance. Can everybody see my screen?
Yes, please.
Okay, so let me shut this down now. Can everybody see my screen?
Yes, please, you can go on.
Okay, sure. So I will probably just give a brief introduction without necessarily going into the whole specifics about sustainable finance, talk about why it is important, talk about how it is linked to business performance, how it works, and how it has worked in Ghana. So without going into any specifics, it's basically that process of integrating environmental and social governance into investment decisions, especially in the financial sector. For business entities, it's about integrating environmental and social governance in their operational parameters, basically making sure that they can mitigate not just environmental risk, but then social and governance risks that could impair their business growth. So it generally leads to increased longer-term investments, and because of the plethora of global forces, take for example the current global pandemic, which is actually affecting business, it's very important that asset owners start considering how they can integrate environmental and social governance, that is sustainable finance, into their whole decision making. And the last speaker really delved into green finance and climate finance. I don't think I have to go into that anymore. I will just shoot on straight to why sustainable finance. We're talking about meeting the Sustainable Development Goals, for example. We need about $2.5 trillion a year to actually be able to meet the sustainable goals by 2030. In terms of the funding gap for low-income developing countries, they need about 0.5 trillion until 2030. And for climate change, for example, we need about $100 billion every year. Well, we needed about $100 billion every year until 2020, which never happened. I think we got $10 billion. The question is, how much more will we need to actually be able to keep those temperatures below 2 degrees centigrade as we want to? So looking at the whole plethora of issues that we have across rapid urbanization, climate change, a shift in global economic power, demographic and social change, and technological breakthroughs. Bottom line is, these challenges are actually affecting our whole developmental space. We actually need a lot more money, aside from the traditional finance that we have. We need a lot more money to invest in untraditional and unprecedented issues that have to help us meet our developmental kind of growth imperatives. And so that is where sustainable finance actually comes in, to literally be able to provide the other type of finance that focuses on meeting impact imperatives. Impact would mean, what sort of impact are you actually creating? Are you implementing a dam in a village? Are you implementing a solar project in a community? Are you implementing digging a borehole in a village and need funding for that? Talking about the low scale thing. Do you have a big factory that actually transforms waste into energy? What sort of finance do you need for that? That is where sustainable finance actually comes in. And if you see how it has grown from 2026 to 2020, growing up to 40 trillion in 2020, and actually really outperforming their traditional indices by about 4%, because the Dow Jones actually performed the S&P by about 4.5% during the global pandemic, just about 2 months. Why is that possible? Because they are able to have assets that really look at their operational risk over the long term. They actually show greater resilience because they actually look through their value chain, and they have lower reputational risk. They have better protection to their earnings, and a generally better investment has been proven over the time. And how that works is literally making sure that these three pillars, which includes aspects relating to the environment, aspects relating to social issues and governance issues, are integrated within your lending decisions. What recently happened is, talking about the development of sustainable finance within the banking sector, you can see how many countries have actually been able to implement sustainable banking. That is literally making sure that the banks are in position to understand how to integrate ESG factors into their lending decisions. Ghana started the process since 2014. I was privileged to be part of the team that led the implementation in Ghana, or the development in Ghana. Ghana started in 2014 and actually now in the process of implementing. And this is basically the principles in Ghana as they stand. Ghana chose 7 principles and are actually planning to implement it initially across 5 sectors. Well, basically 10 sectors, but then guidelines were developed for 5 critical sectors, including agriculture and forestry were linked together, mining, oil and gas, construction and real estate, and power and energy. So that is for the banks, but then what about the private sector? Where can they actually get finance for some of their projects that have impact? For example, some of the traditional banks may not have that kind of lending blend in terms of the type of finance that will look at impact scenarios or impact issues, but there are generally a plethora of funds out there. But then, you know, there's always this talk about there are funds, but we don't have access to the funds. It's just the fact that there is this lack of understanding in terms of how to package the projects in a way that are bankable, as the previous speaker actually said. These funds have very, very stringent conditions. And to understand those conditions, you need to be able to implement all these factors, environmental, social, and governance aspects, in a way that actually makes your institution or the project you're presenting to any of these funds bankable. In Ghana, for example, you have a couple of institutions that actually provide some sorts of impact finance, Wangara Capital, for example, venture capitals. Africa, well, traditional banks like Carl Bank and ADB banks have some sort of blended finance mix that they can provide to those who have particular impact projects. I think, without talking too much about this, I'm looking forward to the opportunity to exchange some more ideas about specific questions that were asked in terms of how can renewable energy actually get funding from non-traditional banks, from traditional banks, for example. How can agricultural entrepreneurs actually access funding that is not necessarily a bank institution because of the high interest rate and all other issues that we're going to talk about. So thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sondo, for that very insightful presentation. I have a follow-up question. What would be the financing condition for big infrastructure projects? Example, construction businesses. Do financiers need to be tied to environmental considerations before they access funding?
Well, they don't need to be tied only to environmental considerations. The bottom line is, what are you funding? You would want to understand what the inherent risk within the project you're funding is. So the construction entity must actually make sure that he has been able to identify his risk, and he has actually been able to identify mitigation solutions that can help him address the risk. Take, for example, if it's let's say it's a supermarket, for example. Okay, where is that supermarket constructed? This is more or less just the traditional simple aspects that would need to be considered. Where is it constructed? What site is it constructed in the city? How is the traffic situation? How is the social mobility around where that place is constructed? Have all those been taken into consideration during the development of the project? Because if these are not taken into consideration, whoever is funding that project would actually identify this as a risk. Generally, if they like the project, they'll be in a position to work with you to address those issues before they can fund, because for them, it's a risk they're carrying on if they don't ensure that those issues are addressed before they can invest in the project.
Thank you very much. One last question. What are the key governance issues affecting climate financing? Who should address these issues and how?
Well, key governance issues literally have to focus on the nature of the project. Governance would actually relate to how is decision making made within the entity, how are environmental issues addressed, how is it tracked, how is performance of those issues tracked over time. Do you have a record of how you mitigate these issues? Do you have a monitoring and evaluation kind of platform which makes you capture these issues over time and have visibility over how you address them over time? Can you actually keep records, that actually go to prove how those implementations have been done over time? Those are some of the key governance issues that most projects actually ignore. Data keeping, kind of monitoring and evaluation, and literally just the governance of project management in terms of, how you kind of track activities, how you monitor activities, and how you make decisions and actually disperse funding during that project.
Okay, thank you very much. So on that note, how can African financial systems build resilience against the impact of climate change?
Well, that was probably a question for Mark and Olufonso, but I'll probably give it a try and then they can chip in to assist. African institutions, basically, most of them have literally seen this as it's not just a challenge at the moment, as an opportunity. As an opportunity to actually diversify their investment portfolio, opportunity to be able to act as, to kind of demonstrate leadership in sustainability, and literally opportunity for growth, because you don't want to be left wanting or kind of lose out on the opportunities related to climate funding, for example, in sustainable energy, in housing, kind of low income housing, in the renewable energy. So the opportunities are literally being able to absorb some of the existing financial instruments that are there to fund these projects that are proliferating, and literally also being internally operating in a way that makes you focus on material issues that affect your business, while literally positioning yourself towards growth that is informed by the current challenges that affect our global dynamics.
Okay, thank you very much. Dr. Samaran, please, what's your take on that?
All right, thank you. And indeed, I agree. It's quite a tricky one, let me say, if I may say. If we're going to talk about the governance of some of these climate finance houses, opportunities, I think for me, I'll always say this, you can't think of what a country has to do first and foremost. You say you can't assess capital, whether public capital out there or private capital, beyond the capacity and the institutional framework that you have in place. It's a lot easier, and I'm going to be very honest with you. Chances are that it may be a lot easier to do investment in Rwanda compared to probably in Central African Republic, CAR. And even though the need may be higher in CAR, and it's very important that there's a level of institutional policy, policy incentives, framework that govern the interactions among the relevant actors, particularly the non-state actors. That's one. Number two as well, you also need to understand that, the project itself, what is the value of that project? Does it have a chance of really becoming transformation on the ground? Those are things that you have to govern all through the process, from the design, and eventually you get to the impact on the ground. And again, I agree with him as well. If you can monitor it, you can't define it. So you have to be able to monitor the results, and you have to be able to report that this are the results that you've been able to find on the ground. So this governance, is structured in a way that there's a part of it that speaks to the things you have in place before you get any chance of money. But there's also a part of it that talks about what will happen in the course of you implementing the project. And you have to be able to, provide that basis, even when you are still out there trying to get the resources for the project that you have. And that's why it's very important that when there is a very powerful framework, and I'm talking about policy framework at the national level, that allows those kind of investments, it's a lot easier. Now, let me be very honest with you and probably everyone listening to us. When we think of the money that we need, and you think of what is available within the Green Climate Fund, it's not going to solve our problem, not even a tiny bit, to be honest. Let's face it. It's a very good initiative. It's going through a lot of restructuring, and it's doing its best to have an impact on the ground, but that is not where our solution is going to come from. Our solution is going to come from an innovative way of putting money together. And if anyone is out there, you would have heard about the project, the Renaissance Dam in Ethiopia. It's a huge, I think it's about $5 billion. This country was able to create a bond for it that citizens were part of in order to raise the capital for it when some donors decided to pull out. That's the innovation out there. In some cases, you have access to grant resources. Can you use that grant resources to blend it together with a loan from another organization, such that the terms of the lending are still very, very friendly, so that you don't run into any future debts later? And then you also have to find a structure where, can you do build, own, and transfer? So there are a number of ideas. And I think for me, if there is no solid institutional policy framework at the upstream level that is able to provide the space for these things to happen, you may not get that chance in that country. I'll keep it there for now. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. I'll be taking some questions from our attendees. Mr. Kwafo, you have a question here. Is the fiscal risk model same for all the banks in Ghana or unique to EcoBank only? Mr. Kwafo, it's a question for you.
Yeah, hello. What fiscal risk? Risk of the financing on the market? Of
Yes.
Course, well, I don't know whether we have to talk about market risk. If there's market risk, then it affects all the banks, or specific sector risk. I don't know which particular risk the person is referring to here. But yes, of course, there's a market risk out there. But then there is also, well, for now we have, if I should say, the environmental banking, sustainable banking principles in the country. Which is supposed to help banks set up environmental and social governance and then monitoring of internal carbon. So standard across board for now. Some banks may have the policy, others may not have, or maybe implement it to a certain level. So the risk on the market, you can't vary it, but environmental and social risk as cut across board. And that is as to whether you look out for it or you don't.
Okay, thank you very much. I have a question to all. What role does tax revenues, i.e. fossil fuel revenues, play in financing the energy transition? Mr. Kwafo, can you help us with that question?
Okay, great. Tax revenue, obviously, if we impose appropriate tax on maybe fossil fuels, then this could encourage maybe the use of renewables. The fact is that renewables ordinarily require high initial funding, which sometimes make it uncompetitive, but it has low maintenance costs. So if you have maybe tax on fossil fuels, which makes their prices come at par with that of renewables, then it's possible that it will push the interest more towards doing more renewables. But tax, of course, at every point in time, should be done with care. Factors that control tax, including sometimes it could even be political reasons for which tax may or may not be applied. And so that can be quite a complex issue if you have to take it into further detail.
Okay, thank you very much. Abraham Latte has a question for you. He says that what role does tax we just answered that question. So let's move to the next question. Some funds, especially private sector funds, institute tactic prerequisites such as registration in a secret jurisdiction, and these threaten social capital in the oil and gas sector. How should governments deal with some of these, as these are major governance issues? Mr. Sondo, can you help us with this question? The question is from Francis Agberi. He says, some funds, especially private sector funds, institute tactic prerequisites such as registration in a secret jurisdiction, and these threaten social capital in the oil and gas sector. How should governments deal with some of these, as these are major governance issues?
I'm trying to understand the question. Is it about the issue of projects taking place in some socially protected areas?
Yes, I believe.
Okay. Well, bottom line is all about mitigation. It's all about being able to preempt, foresee, and articulate and plan in terms of how you address these impacts in your whole project development. All this actually really helps in making sure that some of these issues are addressed. And bottom line is, when you identify them earlier, you can actually really start engaging in that sort of dialogue that really helps you gain trust with the various stakeholders that you're engaging with, helps you earn the trust of the communities that you're taking part in, and literally make you be able to address expectations that have to do with implementing such projects. I don't think it's about endangering the existence or the continuation of the project. It's just about being able to be in the position where you can address your core imperatives while making sure that you are taking into consideration the aspirations, the wishes and the anxiety, that actually comes with such projects, especially where you're kind of implementing them. And that shouldn't necessarily threaten government revenue. It's all about being in the position to ensure that the various issues, kind of stakeholder mapping, which has come to do with ESIA, environmental social impact assessment. When all those things are taken into consideration, when your kind of monitoring plan is put in place, mitigation plans, then you can actually really, address or implement your project without any issues of, endangering revenues that will come to governments because of the projects. I hope I answered that question correctly. It was a bit of a tricky one. I didn't quite understand it, but I hope I'll definitely have a follow-up on it and address that specifically with the proponent.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Sondo. Dr. Alonso, I have a question for you. How do we balance the state of climate finance expertise in Africa? Dr. Alonso, how do we balance industrialization with financing climate action? What is your bank's plan on this? Balancing industrialization with financing climate action.
No, thank you. And I think this is a very important question, and I think it's going to form the core part of the conversation around this summit and all through the sessions. We took a pathway in Africa of growing what we call our own industrialization, no matter how minimal it may be compared to the rest of the world, through the fossil fuel. We took a fossil fuel pathway. And I think we also are aware of the fact that things are changing globally at the global level. Many countries are also following new pathways. I really think we have even the greatest opportunity to make that leap into a just transition, a cleaner pathway than even the rest of the world, the other continents. Why? Because we haven't locked ourselves into an infrastructure system that makes it difficult for us to be able to make a shift to another pathway. So we haven't built all the roads that we need right now. We haven't built all the airports. We haven't built all the schools that we need. And so we need to build more. But how do we do them differently, taking advantage of this transition? So one of the things the bank is doing very much is to continue to support, so at the upstream level, encourage countries to give, to consider this industrialization, to understand that this industrialization can only happen by integrating climate action into it. So basically, harnessing our huge renewable energy resource endowment. And I'm going to be very honest with you. We've got more than 10,000, we've got opportunities for 10,000 gigawatts of energy from solar. Wind can give us about 110. Hydro can do up to 350 gigawatts. Geothermal, 15 gigawatts. These are huge opportunities, and it's very important. In the past, the argument was that it was very expensive, but over the years, it's really gone down. Some of you may know. In Ethiopia right now, we are having a tariff system of 3 cents per kilowatt per hour for solar panel projects. 10, 15 years ago, they were unimaginable. So as the cost continues to go down, it's an opportunity for continents that have these resources in abundance. So it's very important that we are able to have a policy system that provides that pathway. The second thing as well, it's important to also make sure that this is very much aligned with our national development goals. So here is something that's very funny about many of our countries. We talk a lot about we're going to do this, we're going to do that. We go to the heads of state summit, my country is going to do this. But then you go back to your country, you look at the new development plan for the next 5 to 10 years, and you don't have things that are very built around the climate action. So it's very important. Our job at the bank is to help them to say, listen, beyond the rhetorics, beyond these meetings and conferences, can we see things in the national development plans? But also from the national development plans, every country has what they call 3-year national investment plan. If you go to your Ministry of Finance, they have it. And it's on the basis of that most development corporations are built. So if the AFDB is going to do anything in Ghana over the next 3 years, it's going to be based on the national investment program between the bank and Ghana. So once Ghana says, I am going to put this transition, the steps into these investment plans, that's what any financier is going to look at. And that is the direction that we need to take, and in order to be able to make concrete actions. And the last thing the bank does is we also understand that different countries, Africa is not an homogeneous entity. I want us to understand that. Some countries are way up here, some are here, some have not even started at all. Can we begin to also have a bit of Africa to Africa solidarity platform where, someone in Sierra Leone can learn from Ghana, the government of Burkina Faso can learn from the government of Rwanda. So that fostering that close interaction, sharing of best practices is also one of the things that the bank does. The last point again is sometimes you may need a little bit of resources to jumpstart the process in form of technical assistance, in form of grant resources, in form of, just bringing people together. And the bank uses its convening power to help countries to jumpstart the progress. Not just jumpstarting it, but make sure that you're able to keep it and make sure that it remains an agenda from one government to the other. But it's a lot of things together. So please, when we talk about finance, again, let me emphasize this. Finance is bigger than money. It's bigger than the check. It's bigger than dollars. There's a whole structure of relationship around it. And you must be able to understand that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that very important point where Africa must come together and form a solidarity platform and do things together. I really agree. I have a question from Winfred Mutinda. She says, looking at the African continent in general, are there any countries specifically that are outstanding in the efforts to fight climate change?
There are a number of them are really hard. So first and foremost, we're not where we used to be as a continent. We may not be where we ought to be as a continent, but we're definitely not where we used to be. And that means across board, there has been a positive step in every country across the continent, even in the poorest of countries, Mauritania, South Sudan, Burundi, whatever, you have seen. So in most countries right now, you have a national climate change strategy. Now, a strategy is a strategy. Implementation is a real deal, and I understand. But at least you can't even talk about implementation if you don't have a strategy. So that's the starting point, and a lot of countries. So I want to say, in answering that question, let's be very clear that nobody is at level 0. We're all out of level 0. Some may be at level 8, some may be at level 6, some might be in level 1, but nobody is on level 0. That's one. Number two, we've also been able to see countries that have been able to, within a relatively short period of time, have been able to raise some very deep internal conversation and begin to use it. Can I tell you, I live here in Kenya. 80% of Kenya's energy sources right now come from renewable, as we speak right now. Kenya is one of the biggest leading renewable energy intense country in the world. By 2030, the plan is that we get 100%. Now you may say, well, maybe because they are not oil producing. Well, they started producing oil themselves, but at least they've seen enormous opportunity in renewable energy. You can talk about Rwanda as well. You can talk about, some of the transition that South Africa is beginning to make gradually in steps as well. You can also talk about what is happening in Ghana as well. So we can compare countries. What we can do is that we can pick a set of best practices. Why has Kenya made this progress so far? Because of private sector. One private investment focused policy changed the whole landscape. And right now, everyone wants to be part of it. And that is exactly the approach. So you can learn them from Kenya. What is the good thing that is happening in Rwanda? You can learn and contextualize that in countries. So there's something to learn from one country. Even bad things you can learn. And I remember Professor Kereke Chooks was saying, when 15 years ago, there was a delegation from Ghana to Oxford, and they told them, please don't follow the path that Nigeria took. That's a learning. So there's always something to learn. It's important to just create a platform for you to learn. What do we want to learn? The best practices. So that something that works in one country, if it can be replicated in another country, we encourage that. So I don't want to, so I think now you understand that I'm being a politician. I'm not going to tell you which country is number 1, which is number 2. No, there's a lot to learn from multiple countries. I just also remember Mauritius as well, and a number of countries, even Ethiopia. And even Ethiopia, you're talking of a country that is driving a change by looking into inwardly in raising the finances for it, as opposed to always depending on external flow of funds. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I have a follow-up question from Francis Agbere. Mr. Sando. Mr. Sando.
Yes, I'm still here.
There's a follow-up question here for you. Francis is talking about the issue of assessing fund and requirements on institutional setup requirements, ownership arrangements, meted out to potential clients by funders. The discussion we had earlier, he's following up to clarify what he was asking about.
Okay, well, bottom line is funders have their own imperatives in terms of conditions and underlining, how do you call it, requirements. They have threshold for appetite, in terms of appetites, in terms of the kind of risk that they can carry, those that they will not carry. They have their sweet spots in terms of the things that they will invest in and they will not invest in. But generally, the bottom line is literally having a good governance structure. What is a good governance structure? transparency in decision making, aligned with operational and strategic imperatives, financial governance in terms of management of records, and literally being able to demonstrate a track record. Either it's something that you've done before, or something that you are doing new, but then working with a certain partner who brings on board that experience. So the conditions generally really differ. It all depends on how well you understand these conditions, how well you've positioned yourself to be able to implement most of these governance practices, which I must say, the private sector in Africa is generally warming up to understanding that to be investable, you need to be able to demonstrate. There's that notion of I'm the CEO, I'm the boss, I decide what I want to do. It doesn't really happen anymore if you're going to seek for impact funds. As Olufonso said, it's not about being able to attract funding or it's not about a nice project that has impact, that is investable. It's about, okay, how is this project structured to succeed? How is this project structured to be sustainable? How is this project structured to actually pay back the money that we invest in it? How is this project structured to actually grow and bring us more, returns if we're actually doing an equity investment? So there's a lot more understanding in terms of what it comes to, access to money. It's not about money, as he said. It's about the whole financial framework. What sort of financial instrument is actually aligned with my project? Is it debt and equity, or is it do I need to go for philanthropy? Because there's certainly family funds that generally fund charity institutions, but then they will also fund impact and kind of profitable and for-profit entities. So I'm trying to kind of figure out how I can put a finger and kind of give him a blueprint of what funders are looking for. But all I will say is it really varies across who you're talking to. It kind of varies across what sort of sector you're actually involved in, and also your location, your country, because some projects may be more appealing in Kenya than in Senegal, for example. So those are all considerations that actually play out in terms of what funders look out for. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We mentioned that finance is more than just money. And there's a question here from Frank who says, but carbon tax has not proven to be effective since there is no uniformity around the world. For example, EU is able to use carbon tax, but the US is not obliged as many countries. So what other measures can help speed energy transition? This question is to all three speakers, please.
Can I have a go? No, Dr. Somorin will have a go, then I'll join in.
No, let me jump in here. So remember I kept on talking about this innovative finance that we have to do. The number of options, and I'll be honest with you, I'll give you an example. Between 2008 and 2011, I was working in Cameroon, very much on climate change, but very in the forest sector. And we were looking around the whole notion of financing sustainable forest management within the RED Plus initiatives, as well as contributing to implementing climate resilience in the whole entire forest sector. And for the Central African region, the bulk of their, they've got a huge forest sector that has forest concessions and all that. But we did one analysis. So globally, when it comes to timber, there are two categories of countries. There are the producer countries and there are the consumer countries. The producer countries are basically, a lot of West and Central African countries, Ghana, Nigeria, anyone that can produce the timber that is needed in consumer countries, basically Europe. And then the timber industry on a yearly basis, so there's an organization called ITTO, International Tropical Timber Organization. the timber industry was going to, as at this time, it was about 10 years ago, it was going to around 3 to 5 billion euros a year that the consumer countries were paying the producer country. And we decided, what if we are able to ask for an additional ecological tax of 1% that is paid by the consumer countries, and then you put that in a separate fund, and that is supposed to finance sustainable forest management. You can do the math yourself. Now they need the timber; they will pay for it, and so it all comes down to, I think, unfortunately, the conversation didn't go far because we're struggling about who should manage the money and what should the money go for, and oftentimes that's also actually a challenge in Africa. We don't have that uniformity of ideas and that consistency of pushing a big idea. But that's exactly what could have happened. So think about leaf forestry, think about gold, think about coffee, think about anything that we produce as minerals and we sell to consumer countries. And you put an ecological tax on it, and that tax is there to support, the environment. But you have to be the one to determine it. And globally, I think those opportunities are there. So for us, if we're able to put the idea forward, create a system around it, and make sure that everybody abides by it, it's part of trade, and there's no regulation against that. So that's one example that just came to my mind that I wanted to share. I'll just pause here and allow other speakers to give their ideas as well. Thank you.
Well, I don't think we can measure energy transition only tied to carbon tax and emissions. There are a lot more other opportunities out there that can actually support the whole energy transition. We have entities in South Africa, for example, South America, who've been able to do that through via energy efficiency bonds, not necessarily carbon. You have the voluntary and kind of national carbon trading systems in South Korea, for example, that are still really trading in carbon. And for somehow the whole carbon thing did not work in Africa because we didn't really get it to be able to use that as a vehicle for transformation. But I don't think all is lost. I think with the, most all African countries, for example, generally have their national their NDCs now already clarified, and in that whole mix of projects that they need to do, there is a huge potential for transformation. That can be packaged in some form of carbon emissions, voluntary system or not, that would literally help, assist in the whole energy transition. So I don't think we can say carbon is the only instrument that would drive energy transition. There are a lot more other things that can be considered beyond carbon to actually help Africa with that transformation.
Thank you very much. I'd like to hear from Mr. Kwafo. Hello, Mr. Kwafo.
Yeah, okay. Hello. Thank you for the opportunity. I think that good responses have been given for this. But there's one way. We always look at tax. What about incentives? Say tax can go one way, incentives can also go the other way to still promote the impact or create the impact that we are looking for. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much. I have a few questions here from our attendees. Alfred Indum is asking, given the accumulated debt owed IPPs in Ghana and possibly other African countries, how do prospective utility scale solar developers in Ghana manage such a risk? And I'd like to hear from Dr. Lumfusho, please.
Sorry, I'm not sure I got the question correctly.
Okay, he's asking, Alfred Indom is asking, given the accumulating debt owed IPP in Ghana and possibly other African countries, how do prospective utility scale solar developers in Ghana manage such a risk?
It's quite a tough one. But I think, again, if I got the question correctly, and I'm trying to read it myself now to see some of the key anchor points there. What I'll say is for the utilities, you think on the one hand, some of the investment costs that goes, the investment costs that go into setting up the system in the country, and then you also think on the other hand as well, the payment systems and the commercial viability of all those investments in the business. For most African countries, and I really hope I got this question correctly, it's been a struggle. You actually find them, most of them, you find them still subsidized by the government. And yet you ask yourself, these are utilities that are highly subsidized by the government, and yet many of them are still not corporate. They are still not profitable. What I've learned in the past is, from experience, is also the fact that many of them have not been run by corporations, as private sector approach, which oftentimes leads to always depending on the government for bailouts. And given the significance of energy, the government cannot ignore them. And then for the bank, the notion becomes, can we look at some of the countries that have been able to take a different model? And one of them is Mauritius. Can you think of a public-private partnership around utilities to make sure that the investments that is required at every point in time is sustained, one, but also the market side as well is also very much predictable, that you can get your returns back. People can pay the right amount of money that energy costs, but also they are very sure that once the quality is delivered, they won't have problem to pay. Listen, I'm originally from Nigeria, and every time you ask a Nigerian, if you ask a Nigerian if you were short of 24-hour electricity, but the cost would triple, will you pay? And 80% of them will tell you, yes, I'll pay. I just want to be sure that it's consistent, and that the problem is to pay for something that is not high quality, that is also not consistent. So it means as well that we need to use another critical lens to look at the business structure that govern and the principles that govern our utilities. Are they operating as pure public entity, or are they operating as a PPP arrangement, or are they operating as a corporation, private corporations? Those are some of the things we can reflect on. But I probably will defer to other speakers to give ideas on what they think, given that this is touching on Ghana. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Kwafo, would like to hear from you, please.
Yeah. Hello.
Yes, hello.
It's something that calls for looking at maybe, of course, debts have been created already. How do you manage them? Idea of bonds and things have been raised to try to manage some of these bonds. That has been difficult, but I think that have been created already. If you ask me, maybe the question that we should be asking ourselves now is, what do we do to prevent it from future recurrence? And if you ask me, it should still be issue of governance, how we manage these things. If it's thrown always to the arena of maybe politics and things like that, it eventually would yield the kind of resource, and then we get a situation where getting a solution becomes almost impossible. But I believe that some of these things should be thrown more into the professional hands to be adequately managed, to be able to come out with a solution that is sustainable.
Okay, Mr. Kwafo, an anonymous attendee is asking, since some of the conditions to access the funds are stringent, how can rural SMEs strategize to position themselves to successfully access some of their funding?
To strategically position themselves to access this year funding. Of course, it's interesting, but sometimes the GCF rather tend to make room for maybe the condition he's describing. Maybe you see what it's rural hot. So, maybe the deprived. You know, there's this specialized funding that can be made available to communities to resolve special challenges, which normally is not in the form of grants, you know, up to about 10 million. That a community can come together to identify their problems and seek or kind of funding for it. Of course, for the direct ones that we do, the conditions are there. Every person coming in ought to satisfy the specific requirements to be able to assess it. But there's always also room for deprived communities who can also really come together to fashion a project that can get grants in support from the DCF.
Okay, thank you. We are coming to the end of this session. Before I summarize and give you the key takeaway from this session, I'd like to acknowledge our sponsors and partners, Notra International and Kenya Advice Limited, and our sponsors, Oxford and Oxfam and Ford Foundation. And to our attendees, thank you so much for joining this discussion and staying on till the end. But then I'd like to take a final thoughts from our panelists. I want to know what African governments should be thinking about in negotiating better for climate financing for COP26. This is to all our panelists.
Can I go first?
Yeah, sure. Please go ahead.
Yes, thank you. This has been a very, very fruitful discussion. I've learned a lot, and I think we're reinforcing the key points here again. Listen, I'm going to be very honest. Going forward, you know, there was a time where there was something called the Clean Development Mechanism. Almost every continent benefits immensely from it, except Africa. And it wasn't, I think we were asking for a separate rules for us. And that didn't happen. And I'm going to tell you, it's a global norm. It's a global process. There are not going to be two rules, one for Africa, one for the rest of the world. There can be considerations. But there are certain countries that have low capacity to do things at a certain pace, at a certain scale, but there are not going to be separate rules for them. So what it means is we have to up our own value. We have to up our own game. We have to put our own house in order. So for me, I think what I want to emphasize and probably leave with us is let's put our house in order. Let's be very aggressive. We've learned a lot from the mistakes of the past. We shouldn't repeat them anymore.
All right, thank you very much. Mr. Sondo, what are your thoughts on this? And what do you think African governments should be thinking of in negotiating better for COP26?
Okay. I think that the challenges are actually immense. I think we need to really start looking at doing things in a different way. We really need to kind of look at our institutional governance. We really need to look at being able to attract not just, you know, development fund, but then also private sector funding that's also actually going into African countries at the moment. It's about being ready for the opportunities, because at the moment the opportunities are there, I feel like we're not necessarily really ready to tap into most of them. And if you look at what is going to happen to our whole infrastructural landscape, looking at 2050 population growth in Africa by 70%, looking at the, you know, growing youthful population that we're going to have in Africa by 2050. Bottom line is they are inherent, in as much as they are kind of really salient and very huge risk in all these developmental scenarios. There are so many opportunities that we can actually tap into and literally leapfrog and develop in a totally different way we don't necessarily need to, I think I heard a question about, do we need to kind of divest and kind of look at other revenue options aside from oil? Oil and gas is always going to be there. But then the issue is, how do you look at other sectors which can actually get to benefit from the sort of opportunities that are inherent with respect to climate change and SDGs and climate finance, for example. How do we position ourselves to be able to attract this and actually use this as a way of transitioning in a way that is considered low carbon? So I would probably say bottom line is institutional governance and literally being able to do this differently, because what we did in the past probably will not apply anymore. We literally need to kind of up our ante, as Olufunso said. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Kwafo, what are your thoughts on this? Thank
you very much. Wonderful presentations by my co-panelists. They are great presenters. I must say that lawyers say that he who counts for equity must come with clean hands. And basically, institutional structures is about what Bernard just emphasized on, and indeed that is what it is. That if we are going to negotiate and we ourselves are not seen as being trustworthy or not having a capacity to even manage anything that is given to us, then what happens? I would say that we should begin to African countries should apply a more professional approach to problem solving, then create that track record that shows that indeed the paradigm has shifted. It is not that when you take money to Africa to rear a cat, the cat will turn out to be a goat. No, that we know that now it is what it is, that when you put in something, you can really get from it the results that's expected. I believe that when we begin to set our own pace in that way, then we begin to apply, we begin to, negotiate at a level that is just at par with those we're negotiating with. It's important that our structures are strengthened and it's being given more professional touch, to the extent where that, well, probably, I can imagine that some of these stringent measures and things have been put in place because maybe it is known that in the third world countries, when you take something there, the thing will not do exactly what you want to do. And I believe that's what probably have motivated these things to make things so stringent. But it is high time we also set a track record of having the example to that, yes, principles of transparency and accountability is not just a lip talk, talk, but it is indeed in practice. And I believe when we establish that, that will speak for us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Capacity. That's what I kept hearing throughout the presentations and the conversations we just had. Ladies and gentlemen, you agree with me that this has been a very wonderful and insightful session. I'd like to once again acknowledge our sponsors and our partners, Notra International and Kina Advisory Services, Oxfam, and Ford Foundation. Thank you very much to all our participants for staying with us throughout the session. All right, we have one final question here. What access points exist for deprived or vulnerable groups within the communities to access funding? I believe that question has been answered already. Thank you. So a few takeaways from today's discussion is that we have to look inwards, and then we have to find new ways to industrialize. And then looking at this present transition, and this new ways to industrialize should be aligned with our national development goals. And we need to have an African solidarity platform. And Dr. Alonsho mentioned that finance is bigger than money, and we have made some progress across the board. And that Africa is not too behind as it seems, and Africa is getting there. We are not where we used to be. And then Mr. Kwafo mentioned the issue of transparency and then building strong institutions and structures, and then to build capacity as well. And then there's we need to have an approach to solve problems. and African countries must learn from each other. Mr. Sondo mentioned that we need a good governance structure to help us succeed in financing climate change. All right. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you very much.
I think you have your hand up. You can speak now, please.
Yes, I think I can conclude at this point whilst I raise my point. And I think it's been a very useful conversation. And maybe we would have more time at some point to discuss more, because financing is at the core of the transition. And as we understood from the earlier panel, the urgency we have on our hands as a continent not to be left behind. And if we are to be able to participate in the economics of it and also adoption of the technology, then we need to work with our banks, we need to work with our financial institutions to be able to deliver it. So the core question really then is, how urgent are the banks looking at the transition question? And what are the risks that are already emerging on your desk for you to support SME systems, businesses to address, those risks for us to be part of the climate economy, really, and not just continue to depend on our revenues from the oil and gas sector. Because believe it or not, if it happens tomorrow and there is no revenue coming from oil, we will still have to find a way to adapt. And are we going to continue importing the technology, or we will leverage on the resources available to us to be able to develop technology, participate in the economics of the transition? And those are important questions that we have to answer into the future. And I'm grateful for the foundation that has been laid today. We would share those perspectives with the participants and those who would want to watch the video again and again to be able to appreciate where we are and where we are headed. So, if you close your session, I could round up for the day, and then we continue tomorrow.
Mr. Boachi, you can go ahead. Thank you.
So on behalf of the center and the partners, we are so grateful to all the participants and especially the panelists for today.